The supporters of the Iran war would try to have you believe that 100% of MAGA stands behind this war, but that couldn't be further from the truth. At least half of people who formerly identified as MAGA hate this war, and we hate the people who got us into it. Our feelings are better represented by the dozens upon dozens of influential veterans, journalists, activists, and power brokers who were instrumental in getting Trump elected, who have now come out against the war.
We're seeing an attempted coup within the Republican Party by neo-Nazi fascists led by Kemp, who is a clear neo-Nazi fascist, and then also by Tucker Carlson, by Fuentes, by Owens. We're seeing an attempt by these neo-Nazis to take over the Republican Party. Fortunately, good Republicans headed by President Trump are stopping it. And President Trump said, these people are not MAGA. These people are not my people. But they're trying to take over the Republican Party. And Kent blames Jews for everything. You know, he blamed the Jews for the Iraq war. Israel was against the Iraq war. I know because I spoke to Prime Minister Sharon. He spoke to President Bush and urged him not to go into Iraq.
If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. And I think that people sitting right next door in Iran, young people, and many others will say, the time of such regimes, of such despots, is gone.
But according to Kent, anything that was bad had to be the Jews. This has to end. The Republican Party has to disassociate itself from its fascist neo-Nazi wing, which is growing within the Republican Party, particularly among young people. And it's a real threat to America, to democracy, to American Jews, to Israel, and to American values. And we have to put an end to it now.
Actually, Dershowitz, it's not only Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson who disagree with the Iran war. It's about every other conservative influencer in my orbit and the orbits of millions of other Americans who disagree with this war. From Colonel Douglas McGregor to Colonel Daniel Davis to Joe Rogan to world-famous geopolitical genius and icon John Mearsheimer to Charlie Kirk. Megyn Kelly to Tim Dillon. And how dare you try to besmirch the name of Joe Kent, who is more of a man than you could ever be in 1,000 years. And it isn't only Joe Kent who sees the writing on the walls. In this 3-part series, I'll be providing clips of famous military vets, from Navy SEALs to Green Berets, MAGA, original gangsters, influential independents, famous conservatives, patriotic comedians, and everything in between, who actively and vehemently disagree with this war.
Sometimes you look at the polling data and there are numbers that just jump off the screen at you, and this is one of those. Because just take a look here. MAGA GOP view of Trump. Approve 100%. 100%. If you are a member of MAGA and the GOP, you approve of Donald John Trump. 0% say that they disapprove. You don't have to be a mathematical genius to know you can't go higher than 100%. He is the 1972 Miami Dolphins. Now, there are some Republicans who disapprove of Donald John Trump, but they are not.
Producing the fakest poll in American history, created by the military-industrial complex to gin up support for the ongoing, now into its 3rd week, and ever-growingly expensive and deadly to American soldiers, war in Iran, which is being celebrated by CNN and the White House. So you know that there's an information warfare operation going in order to, well, lie
to the American people and themselves. I don't know about you, but I know I exist. I know my mother exists. I know that my aunt exists. I know that all my friends exist. 100% of MAGA does not support this war.
We're just at the beginning of a very long and desperate contest. And the thing that he continues to ignore is, look, oh, that's a great cartoon. That's perfect. What he continues to ignore is that Iran's principal mission is to survive. That's how they win. They survive. They do not disintegrate. They do not fall apart. They continue to resist. What's the definition of winning for us? Well, we have to be seen as having conquered the enemy, of having brought him to his knees. Now, who is likely to succeed? We, 7,000 miles away, are going to bring this country to its knees so that President Trump can arrive like Douglas MacArthur did in Tokyo at the end of World War II? No, it's not going to happen. It's fantasy.
We're not winning against Iran. What message are we sending? We're sending a message that we're a bunch of fools. That we started a war we can't win.
Yeah.
The FT had a big editorial today. This is the Financial Times, which is very sympathetic to the United States and the various cockamamie schemes that we come up with. The Financial Times usually supports us. They're saying we had no clear objective. We didn't have the required military forces to achieve any of the objectives that we were floating, and we had no plan. That's what they say. And of course, they're correct.
Yes.
So the question you want to ask yourself is, what does this tell the Chinese and what does it tell the Russians? It tells them that we are incompetent. And of course, the Russians have had enough dealings with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to fully understand just how incompetent we are.
Yeah, and that leads to part of the other problem here. I mentioned at the outset that there was, first of all, are we going to run out of missiles? You've addressed that. That still remains very much a concern, regardless of what he just said. The president did there. But then there's also this issue of why we started. Now, he came in as the peace president and all this, and he said that, this war wouldn't have started without me, but now he started one. So now they got to justify why it is. You said this was all about selling and marketing, and that's what is going on. Well, there's another effort concurrent with this one as to why we launched. Now, Secretary Rubio, and I'm going to show you this in a minute, kind of started a firestorm yesterday by inadvertently admitting that we weren't even going to go start this war, but that the Israelis were, and that we, quote, had to go and fight with them. Otherwise, we'd have been hit anyway.
You actually talked to NBC News last night about that strike on the girls' school, and you said it was terrible. We made a mistake.
The kids are still dead, but I think it was a horrible, horrible mistake. I wish it hadn't happened. I'm sorry it happened. Yeah, I can assure you it wasn't intentional. And then when you make a mistake, you ought to admit it.
I think the 2026 elections already, we are behind the 8 ball as far as the electoral process. I think if you add in high gas prices, high oil prices, and if we are still bombing Iran, I think you're going to see a disastrous election.
It just seems so insane based on what he ran on. I mean, this is why a lot of people feel betrayed, right? He ran on no more wars and these stupid, senseless wars, and then we have one that we can't even really clearly define why we did it.
Well, but he said he's against endless wars.
Well, they're
running
all,
against endless wars.
Listen, man, they're all endless.
All right, let's say something to get me assassinated here. You might have noticed something drastic has changed. Many are waking up and seeing very clearly something like, well, this.
How much influence does Israel have on our country?
Israel's controlling our government.
Israel controls us.
Israel is in control of our government.
Israel has run American foreign policy for 30 years.
It feels like we're just owned by Israel. We just never knew it.
Is the United States government now just taking edicts and orders from Israel?
Israel first. This really is an Israel first administration.
No, it has nothing to do with nuclear weapons at this point. This is now that we want to go all in and take out the regime. It's time for us to close the chapter on the Iranian Ayatollah and his henchmen and start a new chapter in the Middle East. And that sounds good, doesn't it? But what have we learned when it comes to wars, and especially wars in the Middle East? What you draw up on a whiteboard rarely happens. What you think theoretically is going to occur, there might be unintended and unforeseen consequences. Especially when you're talking about a country 2.5 times the size of Texas. It has 90 million people and was an ancient and great power with well over a dozen ethnic groups. If the people of Persia want to take back their government organically, authentically, from the ground up, we will be cheering them on. Of course we will. But Western forced central planning regime change is if we are just going to take out the Ayatollah. Oh, really? what comes next? What comes after regime change? Might be, oh, well, we need a small number of U.S. troops to support the new regime. And then, well, the new regime needs our financial support. Then, okay, then we need a few more U.S. troops. We have seen this play before. Or, again, regime change, you have no idea how this is going to work out. You have no idea. The best case scenario is like probably 5,000 U.S. troops and $100 billion. The probably most probable scenario is a bloody civil war that results in a couple 100,000 people dead, all these different ethnic groups fighting. You don't know how things are going to work out, actually. You could predict them. You can have probability. You could look to history, but you don't know with certainty. And that kind of arrogance and that kind of pride is exactly why we got into the quagmire of Iraq and Afghanistan, and why Libya is still in a civil war, and why 600,000 people died in the Syrian civil war, resulting in 6 million refugees, largely remaking the polity and the entire demographic composition of Europe because we thought we knew. No, you don't know, actually. In fact, it could be a catastrophe. And I'm going to build out more why we must together resist regime change. It's not about taking out the nuclear program. That's a separate topic. You could support that. That is defensible. It is indefensible after everything we've seen the last 25 years to start beating the drums for regime change at yet another Middle Eastern country, this one being the biggest of all we have dared to get involved in.
The only people who support this war are those born between 1946 and 1964 who watch a lot of Fox News. That's it. I'm not attacking them. By the way, they're Americans. They're my equals as Americans. I love a lot of them. But their perspective on the U.S. and the world is very different from everyone else's. Very, very different. And so they're not the ones who got Donald Trump elected, actually. The people who got Donald Trump elected are the people who hadn't voted for Republicans before or even voted at all before. And they're like Joe Rogan listeners, or people who use nicotine pouches. They're Hispanic voters. They're young black men. They're non-traditional Republican voters who voted for Trump because he promised not to keep doing the same thing. And one of the things he promised not to do again was to hand operational authority over to Benjamin Netanyahu, as other presidents have. We don't want any more of that. Why would we? And we're not going to make Mark Levin or Ben Shapiro, who have almost no organic support in the media world, no one really watches them. We're not going to hand control of our foreign policy over to people like that who don't know anything and who don't have America's interests at heart or even in mind. So breaking faith with those people, those voters, the ones who actually got Trump elected and whose coalition promised a new day in American politics, that's a big deal. It's a betrayal on the level that I don't think people who aren't in those groups can understand. This is heartbreaking. And by the way, a lot of those people really like Trump. They like his style. They think he's hilarious. He's brave. He's just like, they like him. And to see this is, it's so wounding. It hurts. I've got a bunch who work for me. I'm related to some, they're all Trump voters. And I talked to them in the last 24 hours. Boy, they're upset. They're not just mad. Like, I hate Israel. That's not the impulse. They're definitely starting to hate Israel. Why wouldn't they? Our relationship with Israel is hurting us gravely. It's getting Americans killed. So they're mad, but it's more than mad. I can't believe he did this to us.
It is an isolationist or non-interventionalist worst nightmare. It is exactly the opposite of what President Trump ran on. Exactly the opposite. And yet Fox News is salivating over the prospect of more war, an extended conflict, and Lindsey Graham is its spokesperson. And President Trump seems to be enjoying that, because if he weren't, we wouldn't be seeing that anymore.
In this video were just a few of the people who have come out against this war. In the next 2 videos, I'll be showcasing many, many more. And in this time of censorship, you must make sure that you follow your favorite creators across platforms. My YouTube is Brandon Wright 1001. My Facebook is Brandon Wright, and I have Charlie Kirk as my profile picture. My X account is Brandon6191983. My Reddit is Brandon Thomas Wright, or Rebel Always. Rebel spelled with 2 L's. On Instagram, I'm Brandon WRG. Again, with Charlie Kirk as my profile picture. My Rumble is Brandon Tom Wright. My Truth Social is Brandon Tom Wright. My TikTok is Brandon Wright, ACCO. My Substack is Brandon Thomas Wright. My Quora is Rebel Cash, Brandon Wright.